I want to talk about the way that we talk in our families. We obviously do a lot of talking, and that's a gift. It's a privilege to be able to speak. Imagine if you weren't able to communicate. But it's also a responsibility because our words ultimately don't belong to us, they belong to God, and our words have power. And our words, the way that we speak to one another, reveal who we are and what we actually believe about the gospel and about Jesus. And practically, in terms of our everyday life in our families and where our families head and how our families experience life, there's really hardly anything more important than the way that we communicate with one another. I don't think that it probably takes a lot of work to prove to you the importance of how you talk. In fact, I've been studying the wisdom books recently, and there are books in the Bible that are actually written to teach you how to live life well. That's wisdom. When God created the world, he created the world to work a certain way, and it's almost like he wove into the fabric of the universe a certain way the world functions. And when you live according to that pattern, life goes well, and when you don't live according to that pattern, it doesn't, and you tend to suffer. And I was thinking specifically about the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament, and then the Proverbs of the New Testament, which is James. And it's interesting that two books of the Bible, which are all about giving you that wisdom that you need, both have so much to say about communication. That's because obviously, if you're going to live life well in this world, you need to know how to communicate. And applying that to your family, that's definitely true as well. If you're going to have a family, that the kind of family that God wants you to have, you're going to have to work on communication. Maybe you can think of communication as the root of a tree. What kind of fruits does good communication produce? If you have that root of good communication, what kind of fruits are you going to enjoy in your family? And if you have bad communication, that's your root, what kind of fruits is our bad communication going to produce? Well, you're going to have a peaceful family if you know how to communicate, a tense family if you don't. You're going to have a joyful family if you know how to communicate, a very discouraged, frustrated family if you don't know how to communicate. You're going to have a family that has knowledge, that has wisdom if you know how to communicate. You're going to have a foolish family if you don't know how to communicate. Your family is going to be growing if you know how to communicate. They're going to be stuck if you don't know how to communicate, getting worse a lot of times. Your family's going to be effective, going to be able to get things done if you know how to communicate, going to be tripping over each other all the time if you don't know how to communicate. Your family's going to have courage and strength and boldness if you know how to communicate, but you're going to have a weak family, a fearful family if you don't know how to communicate. You're going to have a family that trusts one another and relies on one another if you know how to communicate, and you're going to have a family that doubts each other, is worried about where each other's coming from if you don't know how to speak. It's easy to see why the Bible emphasizes communication the way it does. In James chapter 1, verse 26, he describes it as one of the marks of true religion. If you don't know how to communicate, your religion isn't really much better than idolatry, according to James. In James chapter 3, he says, don't think you can become a teacher if you haven't learned how to communicate. Then he goes on to talk about how if you can control the way you communicate, you pretty much are mature in every other area of your life. Proverbs obviously has a lot to say about the importance of communication. In fact, listen to this, Proverbs 10:11. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life. I love that. It's just like a fountain, and life is spurting over on everyone if you know how to communicate. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 describes the tongue of the wise as bringing healing. If you know how to speak, you walk into a room and it's like people get healthier spiritually. Proverbs 13, verse 3. You guard your mouth, he says. You preserve your life. You want to save your life, learn to guard the way you speak. You don't want to save your life, you just open it up. Don't pay attention to the way you speak, and you're going to bring yourself to ruin. Proverbs 15, 1 and 2 says that the way that you speak actually can make it easier for people to to want to learn and pursue wisdom, or it can make it harder for them. The Bible uses all kinds of metaphors to help you appreciate the power of communication. One of those we mentioned already, health and sickness. If you don't know how to speak, it's like you're the coronavirus, basically. You're making people sicker. If another metaphor the Bible uses is building up and tearing down. So you can imagine you're trying to build a house and someone comes over and it's just with like a hammer and it's just knocking everything that you build up down. That's bad communication. Frustrating. And if a good communication is like you're like helping the person build the house. In his book, Christian Living in the Home, Jay Adams asserts that communication comes first. According to him, Christian communication is the basic skill needed to establish and maintain sound relationships. A sound husband and wife relationship is impossible apart from communication. Or as another author puts it, the heart of a family is its communication system. That's why one biblical counselor writes, wherever you find failures in families, you'll find breakdowns in communication. Wherever you find success, you'll find good communication. Which means, of course, we need to talk, and we need to talk about how we talk. We need to think carefully about communication. You can't just ignore this issue in your life. The way that you talk is very important, and it's very important that you talk. My father once wrote a book on communication, and he described some of the problems he saw counseling people in their communication systems, and one of them was undertalk, the fact that people didn't communicate with one another. Words are very, very, very powerful. Proverbs 15:4 says, a gentle tongue is a tree of life. Imagine a tree in your home where people could go to and they just get life, like the fruit is life. That's good communication. Proverbs 31:26 says that speech gives kindness to your family. The teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Your family, the wise woman, she's able to communicate in a way that her family treats one another in a kind way as a result. We could go on and on looking at different passages that talk about what words do, and the reason I'm reminding you of all that is because words do something, and for them to do something, you have to use them. We can fail to use our words well by simply failing to use our words, by simply not talking. And you know this, it's so obvious, but there are certain topics that you never talk about as a family. It doesn't usually get healthier if you're not willing to talk about it. There are, after a while, couples who just are bored of talking to one another, honestly, so they don't do much of it. They don't think about the way they communicate. There are others that just are living their life, and communication can take work. It's hard. I remember when Marta and I first were dating, one of the things I loved is when we would go out with other couples, I would start a story and she would finish it. I would want people to know the story, but communication's hard. It takes a lot of work to tell a story well. So I just loved having that relationship where I wanted them to know, but I didn't want to do the work of telling them. And some of us in our relationships with one another, we're just not talking because we're lazy, honestly. We know it takes too much work. Other families have a major appreciation deficit. I remember hearing of one guy, he said to his wife, I told you I loved you when I got married to you, and if it changes, I'll let you know. He was the kind of man that didn't encourage, and so he wasn't using his words to build others up. Now, if we're going to communicate well, one, we have to talk. We have to talk. Do you have the problem of undertalk? But it's not enough that we just talk. That would be the easiest solution, but there's more to talking well than just talking, obviously. And so what I want to do in the videos that follow is just walk our way through some of the more practical, essential elements of effective biblical communication in the family. And we're going to look specifically at Ephesians chapter 4. If you're going to have a home that's good for you and glorifies God, you have to work on the way you speak to one another. So come back to the next video and we'll start looking at what godly, healthy, family building communication looks like.